I'm glad we're having these conversations, Mary, about the faith and why some people leave the faith. Because I think that hearing a daughter's view of what she's experienced, what she sees, what she hears, just what it's like to be a young person in the church, and for you to share reasons why people leave the faith and to help moms hear your perspective, I think that is it's really a valuable exercise. I think it's essential to talk about what happens when your child leaves the faith because of the bad example of another Christian, particularly one who's an authority. Maybe it's a parent, a grandparent, one of their elders in their family. Maybe it's a teacher or a priest, a nun, somebody who has some authority in their life. And then that person really abuses that authority and sins gravely. That can really damage a person's faith. And they just get confused like, what am I doing in this church and whom do I trust? So I thought that you could maybe speak to your experience about that. How would you talk to a friend who might be considering leaving the faith because of the bad example of a Christian in their life?
I think that this topic is really, really important. There are so many people I know personally who have been affected by this very negatively. I have an example of this from my own uh, high school. I was living in Italy with you guys, and I was 16, and we were going to a school that was run by Christian priests. One day, a classmate of mine was giving an oral presentation, and apparently he wasn't doing a good enough job because then the priest got really, really angry. He had a temper about him, and he started chastising this poor boy in front of everybody. And I guess I should have said this previously, but in case there are any small tender ears, I don't want to uh, scandalize anybody, but this priest had a temper about him, and he started yelling at this boy saying that he was, disrespectful for not having been more prepared and that he was, stupid and lazy. And then he turned to the whole class and took the opportunity to tell all of us that we were so unintelligent that he wanted to KILL himself. Obviously, I think he was joking, but he didn't say it in a ha ha kind of way. Like he was like actually angrily yelling at all of us and chastising all of us. And so I just thought that it was crazy that not only a teacher, but a priest who had constantly told us how important our faith was and God was and to love each other and, classic priest spiels. He was just so blatantly going against all of that. And it was not the first time he had done this. He did this regularly. So obviously this story does not capture the lengths to which someone can really be hurt by someone,
Mhm,
especially in an authoritarian position within the Catholic faith.
mhm,
Um, but it's all just to say there are so many different ways in which priests, teachers, like you said, parents, grandparents, a lot of people really have a lot of power. And the higher your position is, the bigger your impact is on others. And so it
mhm.
just is really important um, as a leader to understand that, but also as the receiver to any of that, recognize that that is the sin of that individual person because we all are sinful, we are all imperfect, and so it would help to cling to that perspective that it's the sin or fault of that one person and be able to differentiate between the sinner versus seeing that as the embodiment of the true
Mhm.
teachings of the church.
Yeah, I really appreciate the distinction that you're making. I completely agree with that. And also, just as you're talking, sometimes I just think, well, today's so hard. And if I fuss a little bit, or if I'm, a little bit too short or in my words or impatient or whatever, well, I might give myself some sort of allowance for that. But then just to hear you talk about the importance of authorities handling themselves in a Christian manner, it does give me that reminder and that encouragement to always be watching how I'm treating my children because their faith may be in the balance over my witness. But I also just really appreciate the distinction that you're making Like if I were talking to somebody who were thinking about leaving the church because of the bad example of a Christian in their life, I think what I would say is when I've had that happen, I mean, I certainly have had those experiences where I see someone, like someone in a really high position in the Christian community that I'm in behave really badly, mortal sin, that, horrible, duplicitous life, whatever it is. I've just had to go to God in prayer. There's no way to sort that out on your own. I think you really have to go sort it out with God. And then that helps me start to imagine just little glimmers of that person's path of faith, and that they might have had stretches of the path that are just straight to God and sort of impeccable. And then sections of the path where there's a bit of a turn or windiness in the road. I ask him, Lord, how do you feel when this person is deviating from you? And it just helps me to differentiate from that person and see them as their own person with their own freedom, their own choices, and that God is the beginning of my faith that God is a good judge and he is a good father. And I just tell the Lord, I trust you to handle this situation like a good authority figure. And I'm not that person. And then I think, I have my own life. But then I think, oh, I hope you don't judge me too harshly for the times that I have deviated. So then that's the basis of mercy, where we can approach the person in our life that we're shaken up by and just say, I forgive them.
We too have a responsibility to be really careful about how we act, being loving, merciful, prudent, especially as you grow up and you take on new responsibilities, specifically talking about being a mother. It's really, really important to act with as much care as possible, and that you also then are able to raise your children in the same way where you teach them how to be loving and merciful and, you know, understand how to deal with imperfections with himself as well as other people, so that it can then translate into this bigger picture of recognizing, okay, that's just a person's flaw.
Yeah, that's a really great point. What it brings up for me is that as a mom, I really am a minister. And actually, I'm working on another video that's about Pope Leo's Wednesday audiences. He talks about all baptized people, so that's us, the laity, being ministers, participating in the priesthood of Christ. And so I've just been thinking about this, and it dovetails with what you're saying, because I'm hearing you say that as mothers, we should really remember that all that we do with our children is ministry. We have to help our children work through their disappointments with the fallen people in their lives. And our children, by definition, are younger than us. They're our inferior, they're our subordinate, if you will, in the hierarchy of the family. And so it's really our job to help them look at all the people in their lives that are Christians who do some wonderful things, but also may sin in really grave ways, and help the child learn how to deal with that. That's ministry. When my child is really struggling with the bad witness of someone in his or her life, I will often invite that child to see him or herself as that person's missionary. Even if that person is a missionary or a priest or a religious, one of the things that I say is, can you pray for them and intercede for them, because you're a fellow Christian and they need your intercession. And maybe one day, if you really mess up, other people will intercede for you. You may be young and that person may be your elder, but you really are brothers and sisters in Christ. And we have to help each other. We have to forgive and intercede for those people in our lives.
Well, you bring up a really great point, Mom. It reminds me of the story of, I believe it was Saint Catherine of Siena. Part of what made her sainthood is that she actually called out the Pope at the time. I don't remember the details of the story, but the Pope had left. He was fleeing in time of war or something, and he was living in France and like hiding out, and he was not fulfilling his responsibility as the head of the church. And so Catherine of Siena was just, a young woman, but she ended up like writing letters to the Pope, and she really fought for the Pope to go back and have courage and to lead the church as he was supposed to. I think that there are a lot of saints too that really made their reputation by weeding out corruption and by helping others no matter what their status was. Some of them were higher up in within the authority of the church or politically or different things, but then others were just lay people or mothers too. And so no matter who you are, you have an ability and an invitation to not only receive criticism, constructive criticism, but also to be able to help other people learn ways in which they can be a better witness to their own faith.
I love Catherine of Siena. I believe she was a tertiary. She was a Dominican of the third order, but that technically means that she was a laywoman. So, really, you are completely correct. She was a young woman among the laity who was admonishing the Pope. That really is so telling. And she is a doctor of the church. It just says volumes about the economy of grace and the way that the body of Christ works. Even your child, the young girl or woman in your family, could be that one who really needs to admonish someone and help them find their way back to God. And even if it's their superior, they still have the right to either admonish in person and especially to intercede and to pray for the person who's veered away from the church. That's just one more way that moms really can be ministers to help their children see the power of admonishment and the power of prayer. And in doing that, it can help the child to overcome his or her disillusionment with the sinful people in his or her life.